Well, that's Veerbhadra Singh, and the suspense continues on whether he will be appointed Chief Minister of Himachal Pradesh or not. The usual Congress power games on Veerbhadra Singh refusing to come to Delhi. A decision perhaps on this front could be taken over the next 2 days. But to discuss the implications of the victory that Narendra Modi has seen in Gujarat and, of course, the victory that the Congress has seen in Himachal, we're joined by Rajdeep Sardesai, Editor-in-Chief of our sister channel CNN-IBN, FICCI President and Country Head of HSBC, Naina Kidwai, and Sunil Jain from the Indian Express. Appreciate you joining us here on India Business Hour. But let me get Naina Kidwai in on this discussion. Naina, Modi's victory, as per the BJP and as per Modi himself, is being seen as a victory and a vote for governance, Modi-style governance, for someone who has understood the issues of development, or at least been able to sell the idea of having understood the issues of development. We've seen corporate India coming out in support of Narendra Modi's victory. Is it because corporate India identifies with Modi's style of governance?
At the end of the day, Gujarat is seen as very industry-friendly, and what you have here is a vote not just for industry and progress therein, but the ability to basically deliver across all the human factors, the social indicators across the board. And I think it is a model that many states can look to follow in terms of infrastructure development, industry, employment. But let us not forget that Gujarat has always had the Gujaratis' entrepreneurship and ability to work at its base. And Gujarat has, ever since I can remember, been one of our more industrial states, always in the top 3 or 4. So at the end of the day, it is about ensuring that that path of growth and progress remains. And I have certainly seen.
But sorry to interrupt you, Naina. What is it about Modi's style of governance that appeals to corporate India so much? Is it the fact that there is a certain degree of predictability, there is more consistency in the style of operations as opposed to other state governments? Whenever he organizes the vibrant Gujarat campaign, the who's who of corporate India lines up there. What is it about brand Modi that appeals to corporate India so much?
So any investment decision is basically, yes, about predictability and regulation, less corruption. It's about the ease of doing business. It's about labor and the employability of that labor and the skill of that labor. And at the end of the day, it is about the perception and experience that you have on the ground. So many of the corporates that show up there are already on the ground, and so it's a show of strength about, hey, we're happy to be here. And for those that are looking to see what's working for others, the perception is as important to manage. So to manage an environment which is investment friendly is very, very critical. And to recognize that industry, both manufacturing and the service sector, huge employment opportunities for the youth are important. But it's employment for the youth only if the youth are educated. So you need the level of education, commitment, work culture, all as a very key part of making that investment equation attractive. And Gujarat also has the infrastructure. They have invested well in power, in roads, and will continue to look at ways to do this. In fact, I remember hearing from Mr. Modi how his commitment to the DMIC, the Delhi-Mumbai corridor, is pretty much done. I mean, he has handed over the tracts of land, etc., that is needed because he sees the merit of a corridor such as this, which passes through a large part of Gujarat.
I want to put the same question to you. What do you think brand Modi and why it appeals to corporate India so much? He's often called the CEO of Gujarat, not the Chief Minister of Gujarat. He's the best Chief Marketing Officer that Gujarat could have ever had. Why do you think Modi appeals to corporate India as much as he does?
Okay, before I come to that, I just want to make one point, about what you began with, about this election being, or the 2014 election being one of Rahul Gandhi versus Narendra Modi. I think the great similarity between the two is something which has not been appreciated by anybody at all, which is that Narendra Modi is not, and I repeat, not going to be the BJP's prime ministerial candidate for now. From whatever I understand, Narendra Modi will be the chief campaign manager.
The BJP is going to let Narendra Modi
So
take center stage at the national level, despite this victory and this win.
He will be the campaign manager, which means that he gets center stage. The media, that is you and I, will claim that he is the prime ministerial candidate, but it will keep Nitish Kumar mollified, and so he won't lead the NDA. If the BJP within the NDA gets a large number of seats,
But
then they
Sunil, why would you
candidate.
say that? Is it the threat of Nitish Kumar and the other NDA allies walking out of the NDA, or is it power play within the BJP itself that will prevent them from making him the prime ministerial candidate?
I think as far as the BJP is concerned, he's got 115 seats, and as Shwapan was saying earlier in some other program, no other BJP leader can come even close to him. So I think as far as the BJP is concerned, that leadership challenge is over. He is the leader, but you don't want to disrupt the NDA. So the party cadres want him. So if the BJP is going to put Narendra Modi as the chief campaign manager, if he can galvanize the cadre, if he can get things worked out, and he gets enough seats, then he becomes the prime minister. If he doesn't, then he just goes back to Gujarat. So I think that's it's a great strategy, because the other guys don't walk out. Now, to come to think about why does corporate India love Narendra Modi, I think it's very simple. You go back to Godhra and you look at the revulsion in corporate India and among corporate leaders. Anu Aga, Ratan Tata was one of the guys who came out, one of the gentlemen who came out and talked about Narendra Modi, behaving in a partisan, communal kind of manner. Now, the moment you get confronted by Mamata Banerjee, the same Ratan Tata has no compunction than going back to Narendra Modi. So I think what happens
So
is
you're saying corporate India's alliance or corporate India's support is based on convenience?
Well, I mean, you can call it convenience. I wouldn't be so cynical. I said you got to run business, so you want to go to a chief minister who can give you land. You don't want to go to a government which is going to give you a reservation among promotions. You want to go to a government which says that I will give you industry, I will bring industry. I will not. You don't want to go to a government which says I don't want industry. So I think corporate India is being sensible. They want a gentleman who can give them some work. They can. That's what their fondness is. Whether Narendra Modi can deliver that same promise at the center, which he could deliver in a state in which he is completely in control, is a different matter. I don't think Narendra Modi, for example, can tell a POSCO that I will grant you land in Orissa. He cannot. So Narendra Modi's ability to deliver to industry will be dramatically different as a prime minister, if he becomes a prime minister, as it is when he's the Gujarat chief minister. But it is that promise which is getting industry to move
Let me pick up on
him.
the point that Sunil was making. And, we've talked about Narendra Modi being this pragmatic chief minister, who's trying to drive investment. He talks about job creation, one of the very few chief ministers who actually uses that as an election issue. But how do you explain the fact that the very same Narendra Modi then would oppose FDI and multi-brand retail, at least publicly will oppose things like FDI and multi-brand retail, opposes vehemently the goods and services tax? Negotiations haven't moved forward because of opposition from states like Gujarat. So, he's also trying to balance that pro-development face in Gujarat, the pro-investment face in the state, and the anti-Congress reform style face at the center.
Yeah, and certainly GST for us in industry and at FICCI is a very important one, and we have engaged with Mr. Modi on this and will continue to. So I can only think that we are just not being persuasive enough, because a man of his ilk and intelligence, I'm sure, appreciates that GST is good for the country and industry wants it. And we have to now make sure that if he has reservations, that we can tackle those. And I'm very confident we will.
Sunil Jain, do you actually see Narendra Modi changing his mind on either the GST or FDI and multi-brand retail?
Well, Shireen, to be honest, I'm quite surprised by what Naina is saying about GST, because the assumption seems to be that Narendra Modi is actually balancing the interests of, the anti-Congressism with development. I think it's very, very clear that there are enough chief ministers in the country who oppose GST. These are Congress chief ministers as well as BJP chief ministers, as well as Bihar chief minister, for example. And the reason is very clear. Under Pranab Mukherjee, the central government had said that they would not compensate any state for a loss in revenue here.
Yeah.
Now you cannot introduce a GST, while not promise to compensate for the loss in revenue.
Sure. But do you believe that Narendra Modi perhaps could now drive those negotiations forward?
No, Shireen, the negotiations on GST are not being driven by Narendra Modi or by Arun Jaitley.
I know, but the opposition of Gujarat has been a big stumbling block.
No, the opposition of Gujarat has been because there has been no compensation. The moment now that Mr. Chidambaram has come in as finance minister, he said that this is a valid, demand of the states. I've set up a committee. I'm going to examine it. So the moment the chief minister, the moment the finance minister starts being, conciliatory and says, I'm going to examine demands, I think Narendra Modi or anybody else will concede to those demands. So I think we need to be very clear that some of these things are not pure political. I think FDI in retail, I'm convinced is political. I mean, there I'd agree with with what you've been saying, but GST is not one of them. And one more point, just to address a question raised by, a point made by Rajdeep, that Narendra Modi never got enough seats in Gujarat, and therefore vibrant Gujarat is really a city-specific, kind of phenomena.
Yeah.
I'm sure Rajdeep knows better, but I find it impossible to believe that any state, Gujarat is the only state in the country, which for 10 years, year on year, quarter on quarter if you like, since you're CNBC, which for year on year has delivered a 10% agricultural growth. Nobody else has done it. You cannot have a 10% agricultural growth year on year and yet believe that you didn't have rural prosperity. So I don't know why he never got votes in rural Gujarat, but there was clearly rural prosperity.
Well, we could continue this conversation, but unfortunately, we've completely run out of time. Sunil Jain, Naina Kidwai, Rajdeep Sardesai, I appreciate you joining us here on India Business Hour.